use it to keep ourselves comfortable, to keep our food fresh and our beverages cold. You might say that a refrigerator works by taking heat from the inside of the box and getting rid of it on the outside.
Welcome to Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC Show. We will see you in about 45 seconds or so. Make sure that you are subscribing to our channels, our LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. Turn on notifications, and we are very excited to be here with you. It's almost time, about 30 more seconds. Make sure to grab your notebook and pen so you can jot down notes along the way, because at the end of the show, you could have an opportunity to ask our guests questions so we can dive a little deeper into these topics. And here we go. Welcome to Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC Show.
Clifton, what you doing there?
Hey guys, what's going on? Hopefully this time I'm not going live when I'm not supposed to, like I did like an hour ago. Hey, I just got my new shirt courtesy of Johnstone Supply, and I'm getting A2L ready. You all getting A2L ready? Woo! You know, A2Ls are here, right?
That is right.
What does that mean, A2L already? What do you,
That's exactly what we're going to dive into today. We're going to help break some misperceptions from the industry. And thank you all for joining us, HVACR videos. Thank you for hopping in here. Glad you're with us. And let us know if you have any questions, any comments that we can answer along the way. So we got a lot of things we want to cover today. Hopefully we can get through the whole presentation, because there's some things that are going to be really intriguing as we do this deep dive into A2L Compatible and A2L Certified, sometimes even A2L Verified, and what they actually mean. So there's a lot of misperceptions in the industry. Remember, we gather here every week to dive deep into things that are affecting our industry. And for me, I think this is one of the most important ones right now, getting used to what A2L means. And now that we know that the equipment is already hitting the ground, we've had these discussions before. How do we make sure that all of our tools are prepared? Do we have to buy all new tools, or what we already have in our arsenal, is it compatible? And well, how about we just start with what that actually means? All right. So let's kind of set the stage for this, guys. We all love to study, right? We all love to dive deep into content. Jason, you above all, I mean, you do tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of words of this type of literature, right? Understanding what's going on in the industry.
there's a lot.
There is a lot. So let's talk about the things that we recognize, maybe some things we don't recognize, and have an understanding of how they are incorporated into our industry, both from the equipment, but especially from the tools. So many of us have seen the UL mark before, but did you know that there's actually a variety of UL markings? Did you guys know?
I do
So
now.
we did the research, yes.
And that's kind of how I was. I've always been familiar with the UL, the Underwriter Laboratories, and that it was a label that was on electrical appliances. But now that we're starting to see them on electrical appliances of our own, it made me start paying a little bit of attention. So if we look at markings that we're going to see on equipment as well as on some of our tools, we need to understand exactly what that means. So when we see the UL listed, Ray, thanks for joining us. Glad that you're here today. When you see that UL listed, what that really means is that it refers to a complete product, like machinery, right? Or external power supplies. So we got a completed product. Like if we're going to be working on a unit, it's probably going to have a UL listed certification where it has went through Underwriter Laboratories and it's been verified as a product that is safe for the application. Then we'll also see things like UL recognized, and that really applies to component parts that are intended for the integration into larger systems. All right, who wants to dive with that? Let's think about some examples of UL recognized.
That's a pretty good question there. I like to point out too that when you say UL listed like that, it means it was it's tested to a standard or a number of standards to meet design specifications. So when we say listed, it's not like the customer can say, I want you to test it for this, this, and this. Would they say, I want you to test it to meet this standard or this standard or this standard?
That is right. So when we see these UL recognized, these are actually relatively new, and we'll show you where that actually comes from. So with the UL recognized, that means that we have actually went through a procedure for testing a part, and parts have been redesigned for a specific purpose. And I'll show you exactly which UL that comes from. And then we can also see the UL certified, right? So certified is actually a more general term. So it says right here that can refer to components, products, systems, processes, personnel, facilities. So it gets into a broad spectrum. So if I'm doing a UL certified procedure with certain equipment, that is a big thing all on its own. UL listed is a smaller thing, and UL recognized is an even smaller thing. So it really applies to what the part and what that system or what that procedure looks like. So there's a variety of different things that can be applied for. Now, you're also going to start seeing some labels in our industry, and you'll see here in a little bit why we're talking about this. You're going to see some additional labels that you may have not encountered. I've actually seen these, but I didn't know what they were really for until here recently. So you'll also, instead of seeing UL, you'll start seeing some that are called Intertech. Right? So Intertech is another third-party company. Jason, you could probably tell us more about who Intertech is.
They are, again, a third-party testing, and they will test to UL standards or to customer-specific standards. They do a lot of the AHRI testing for the sear matches and things of that nature. So you're going to see them on components like an evaporator or something like that. They do a lot of testing just like UL.
Yeah, and so if you think about it, like when we started moving into A2L, there's a lot of products that had to be recertified. And so many times when we have significant changes like this in industry, no one party can handle all of the applications and all of the things that need to be done. So we have multiple parties that are involved, that all verified and recognized agencies. And so Intertech has added this additional HVACR sector to it with a variety of different things. So we're doing very exact specifications, procedures, requirements that are done from a standard. And now we're going to go back and we're going to check. We're going to test those, right? So here's the one that everyone is asking. What does this mean?
This actually starts bar fights if you want to get into it. I mean, people start arguing over what does compatible actually mean. Yeah,
and why aren't these labels all the same? They all look to me. What, Ty, any thoughts? Tell me some of the things that you hear from the industry.
Well, the biggest thing I want to point out first is that there is no propane in any of these A2L refrigerants. So let's just knock that out first. So these are mildly flammable refrigerants, and but it's still mildly flammable. There's still a potential in there, and then you end up with a lot of user errors, and then you end up with lawsuits. Unfortunately, accidents, things that happen. So manufacturers are going above and beyond, making sure that they reduce any of that potential in there. And then now you have some manufacturers going a little extra step than another, and then there's just some different ratings and regulations, and there's no requirement that they have to do these because these tools are sold to professionals. So they ultimately, it's your responsibility as the end user to be trained, to be certified, to be able to use this equipment. So you can buy any tool and use it incorrectly. I've been seeing adjustable wrenches used as hammers throughout my career, and you can't blame that wrench for failing. Or somebody uses two hammers together, you can't blame the tool at that point. You have to look at the person. So no matter how safe we make the tool, it still comes back to making sure that we're comfortable in understanding what that equipment is. Now, every manufacturer that I've seen has a little different standards, and there's different ratings and compatibility. And some of it's gotten so there's a bit of a marketing side in there, and I don't blame them for that. So I'm going to start making some tumblers that say A2L compatible.
Yeah. Well, and I think I would buy one.
I would tell you that the flammability characteristics of these A2L refrigerants that we're dealing with, whether they're R32, 454B, 1234YF, all of the data on them is published. It is known. So if you're going to do an internal test at your organization, you know what you should be testing for. You know what the burning velocity is, the ignition energy. You know what the LFL for this particular gas is. So you can do some things internally because that data, again, is public for everybody to ensure that there is a compatibility with your product.
That's
And
exactly right. No,
on that flame spread, this is a little side note here, but Jason and I actually had a conversation, and he's so smart. He looked everything up and found out that it's actually possible to outrun a flame for A2L.
That is so true. You know, I feel like we've learned so much about A2Ls and the specifications. We could probably create our own tool and do our own testing and our own A2L compatible certifications, verifications, and we might actually be legit. So
it's a liability thing on top of it. Remember the McDonald's case, yes, where it never said, you know, caution hot coffee, and then $1.6 million later, now it says caution hot coffee.
And that's really what it comes down to. So the most important thing that we want to stress, and Ty has already brought that to the attention, is that there is no A2L compatible as a label certification. So what A2L compatible means is that it's following some industry specifications. And let's look at a few of them because there are a variety that they can choose from as to what they're going to design by. So let's take a look at one of the more popular ones. So this is UL 121-201. And this is a very specific set of instructions. It'll tell you it's the purpose of the standard is to provide minimum requirements for the design, construction, and marking of electrical equipment or parts, right? And we are going to be working with these type class 1, class 2 hazardous classified locations, right? So it's not necessarily about the refrigerant that it is pumping through the system on a recovery unit or a vacuum pump. We're talking about the environment that you're going to be working in. So that if I have a release of refrigerant in a space and I'm using this tool in this space, it should be designed that it meets these specifications. And so we're going to see this used in a variety of things. So the UL 121-201 is quite specific, and in normal operation, it's not capable of causing ignition of the surrounding atmosphere under the conditions prescribed in the standard. Now, if you want to go spend a few $100s, you can learn more. You can dive deeper into this standard because that's about what it costs to be able to download a complete version of this. But that's what our tool manufacturers are doing. So they're looking at the industry recognized specifications. So we typically look at UL, we look at AHRI, we'll look at some of our IEC, we have a few ANSI, we have a few different code.
NFPA, right.
We have a variety of different code creating or instructional creating organizations that we lean to for instruction. And so this is what our tool manufacturers are doing. So let's look at a few different ones. So we have UL 121-201. So if you see that UL stamp on there and you find out that your piece of equipment has been tested to UL 121-201, that's what we're talking about, is that they are testing internally. They're creating a piece of equipment that is going to be used in that Class 1, Class 2, Division 2, and Class 3, Division 1 and Division 2 environment, okay? So what does that really look like? All right. Well, why are these? This is why we're here. So that is such a good question. That's why we wanted to do this. There is no compliance.
So there are requirements for some pieces of the equipment that we're using to be,
cover those. And so it's a good point, Jay Carey. So the compatibility side is that it will work and it has been constructed to work in the environment if the refrigerants are released into that area. Now, when we start looking at the things that are required, we have some, I wouldn't say required, we have recommendations from the industry that dives a little deeper. And so let's do that. So I'm going to pass up this 121-201. If anyone wants any of this material, just let us know. We'll be happy to share it. This is all public information. I do want to real quickly before go ahead, Jason.
No, go ahead. This is the big one. Yes.
Yeah. So this is really what we're talking about when we're getting into the compliant side. There's really only two pieces of equipment in our industry that are recognized as being compliant in their construction by a variety of different institutes, by EPA, by AHRI, by UL, NFPA. They all fall into a recommendation that started from the EPA within the Clean Air Act. And so it established the UL 1963. I'm assuming probably around 1960. No, but not that old. Probably from the 80s. I should have known that. I won't even say that. So UL 1963 is actually very specific. These are requirements that cover the recovery and recycling equipment intended for the use with a flammable refrigerant when investigated to requirements you can use subsection SB. So 1963 was a starting point for the recovery equipment, evacuation equipment that is under 600 volts and used in indoor outdoor locations, right? So this was constructed in accordance to the NFPA 70 and NEC codes. So it sets standards for the manufacturing of the equipment that we needed in our industry, but it also did include recently some new supplements, supplement SB, that will cover some of the flammable refrigerants, okay? So we will see 1963 still being used in a lot of our industrial reclamation, a lot of our industrial recovery equipment. All right, it's a very common one. Now, let's look at what we're focusing on the most in these compliant, I guess I would say.
Yes.
Yes. So if we go into AHR 740, Jason, you've been on a lot of these committees. You probably know this one inside and out.
There is quite a bit in here. Some of this is recommendations. Some of this is by reference in certain standards and certain codes. So this becomes a very important standard, one that we see almost every whether it be a piece of equipment, a tool of some sort. This is a big, large, all-encompassing type of standard, if you will.
Absolutely. Norm, thanks for joining us. Hopefully there are going to be some things that you weren't aware of this, especially this whole compatible, compliant, certified side of things. So when we look at AHRI 740, the scope of 740 is another one of these performance ratings for our recovery equipment and recovery recycling equipment.
And it's one of the first ones to reference ASHRAE Standard 34 for flammability characteristics.
There we go. So we utilized 1963 for a long time, and then as we got to the 740, we started really looking at our flammable refrigerants and went, okay, so we've used 1963 for a long time. It's worked well. Now we have mildly flammable, and in the near future, I still say within a few years, we're going to see A3 refrigerants, not in split systems, but in monoblock or exterior mounted capacities within our industry. But what it did, so 740 used the ASHRAE Standard 34 and started re-looking at the recovery and evacuation equipment and went, okay, now we need to make sure that these electrical components are going to be safe to work with, because we use this to establish the standards for the equipment construction, right? So we're looking at the safety, the electrical safety of the equipment in these A2L particularly.
Right. This is referenced quite a bit through certain standards and codes and things.
Right. And so we've also seen other pieces of the industry. Remember, so the AHRI, that really is dealing with the heating, cooling, refrigeration industry. The IEC has also looked at that similar design. And so they have IEC 60079-7, and it's very similar. So it is electrical components that are going to be utilized in an explosive atmosphere. So once we start talking about A3, highly flammable refrigerants, we are going to need equipment that can work in environments that could potentially have any of those gases in them. So you're going to see equipment utilizing IEC standards as well if they're going to design equipment that they are planning to be used in some of these atmospheres. Now, remember, that's not saying that it's going to be designed to pump the refrigerant. That's a whole nother topic we'll get into later, because we don't even have recovery units for them. And things like 290, our most common one that we would see, has actually been exempt from reclamation.
Right. I want to also point out that we see this IEC standard. This is an international standard. So one of the standards we're going to reference later on is UL 60335-2-40.
Yeah.
That is the U.S. derivation of IEC 60335-2-40. So there are certain cases where when we in the U.S. adopt, let's say, this international standard, it would be UL 60079-7. When it's the IEC, it is an international standard, but the US does have derivations for a lot of these standards, and it would be the UL version of that.
Exactly, because you got to remember, these refrigerants have been used in other parts of the world for a long time. We look like Australia. We complain about this transition. We are nothing like Australia. They are very hardcore. We might even talk about that here in a little bit, actually.
Some of my social media, I get people from Europe and Australia frequently saying, "Why are you guys making such a big deal about this? We've been using it for 10 years."
They call us babies.
They have some in Australia, they have some really strict training, very strict procedures. They log every ounce of refrigerant. I mean, they are
very
on top of their
serious.
game. Yes.
Absolutely. And that's what we're here to do. We're here to help explain what's happening around the world and why we have these things and why our manufacturers are using them to construct their equipment. Now, you also see some of these CSAs, like this is a very popular one I've seen. This is for non-incentive electrical equipment for use in Class 1 and Class 2, Division 2, Class 3, Division 1 and 2 in hazardous locations, right? So it's a very similar one. It's just through the CSA group. So you have IEC, you have UL, and you have CSA all kind of saying the same things for their own sectors of the industry. And I have seen these different standards used by different manufacturers. So that's what we're saying. There is no actual one certification or one process that we're looking at. It's being looked at from a variety, because you got to think some of these manufacturers are international manufacturers. They don't just make them in the US. They have to make them to work in a variety of places. So they're utilizing codes that are already being accepted internationally. And then
if you look at that CSA standard, it also references the one you already covered, 121-201.
Exactly. So, we just have to be aware where these things are coming from. Don, glad you joined us today. Yeah, you're probably interested in this stuff, and Canada is probably looking at these same kind of things going, well, here's another one. Let me give you another code that we could take a look at. All right. So let's talk about the one that is affecting our tools. That's what we're here to talk about. What tools, right? Let's talk about the one that is affecting them the most and how it's going to apply for us going forward. So if we look at UL 600335-2-40, and then we're going to specifically look in section 12.13. In this, we're talking about when removing refrigerant from a system. So we're talking about the procedure, right? Yeah, absolutely, Don. I'm sure they're starting to look at all of these kind of things. Same way, Canada's actually ahead of us in many ways. So I'd be curious to dive in deeper into exactly what one they're using. But it's probably going to be similar, right?
They're updating standard B52. For those of you that are in Canada, it is B52 that covers your refrigeration stuff, and it is being updated.
Okay, so let's take a look at this, because this is what we're going to see, especially on our recovery equipment. And I want us to understand this when we go re-looking at our checklist. Remember, the goal is to be able to look at our own tools, whether I'm an instructor in a classroom, whether I'm a contractor in a van, whether I'm a manufacturer. I want to know the things that I have, can I safely use them? Because remember, this is all about safe use and handling, right? Okay, so it is very specific. It's for removing refrigerant from a system, either from servicing or decommissioning. It is recommended good practices that all refrigerants are removed safely. So we're here about safety. Here's the interesting thing that applies. So I highlighted it in yellow. Like I said, there's a lot more stuff we can dive into, but we probably don't have a time. We could probably spend half a show on this one slide.
Right. I'm telling you, this standard is massive. It's like 900 pages, and I've read it twice.
Exactly. So you want to dive into this piece of it then, Jason? I know you know this one.
All right. So there are requirements that typically when we think of this is one of the standards that we're used when we're testing new equipment like these condensers and heat pumps and things that are going to be, using the A2Ls.
Right.
This is a design standard, so to speak. And if you read in the annexes and supplemental parts of it says the recovery equipment needs to be in good working order. It says it needs to be suitable for the recovery of all the appropriate refrigerants and, when applicable, flammable refrigerants.
There's the key.
All right. So what this is stating is that your machine needs to be capable and of recovering whatever refrigerant it is you're working on. It needs to be rated for use, if you will, or listed or certified, however you want to put it. And then that little part after the comma, when applicable, flammable refrigerant. All right, it doesn't specify A2, A2L, or A3. It says flammable refrigerant. So that's kind of a requirement, if you will, to say, listen, if you're going to be using this machine needs to be capable of recovering that refrigerant.
So that's what our manufacturers started doing. They started utilizing and adopting 6335-2-40 and reevaluating the equipment that we were currently manufacturing. Super, super important one. Within that same UL
An
335-40,
yes.
yeah, there's an additional one that I'd like for us to point out, just because it caught my curiosity the most, 13.1.
Yeah,
13
HH1, right, yeah.
Yeah, so what we're actually talking about in HH1 is training. And so UL actually created recommendations. We've all been talking about how the EPA is reevaluating technician training and certification for the safe handling out of subsection H of the AIM Act. Now, when we look at things like UL's already recommended to the industry that you should have national training organizations or manufacturers that are accredited to teach the relevant national competency standards and then achieve competency through a documented certificate.
And
That
there's
says a
some
lot.
things there, safety concepts, potential ignition sources, information about flammable refrigerants, training. They're recommending a lot of stuff that, listen, this is a little bit different. Operates the same. Again, just because the refrigerant is flammable doesn't mean the refrigeration cycle changes, but some of our key processes and things may be a little different, and we need to be aware of those.
So we're not going to dive into that. We've done a bunch of those. So just wanted to show you that not only is the EPA looking at training, UL has recommended training. And oh, by the way, if you're interested in exactly what all of these standards are asking for, we happen to have you covered in our low GWP program put together by our very own Jason Upjute.
It was a group effort. Don't let him pull your leg.
That is true, but not everyone can sit and read 900-word documents for the fun of it and read it twice just to make sure that you caught everything, right? There's a special skill set in that. That's why I highly encourage you to take a look at the program if you're not already using it. I know I've seen that one came through a while ago where you've already been doing some of these, and we really appreciate that, Norm. I think it's important for us to understand that, the future of our industry is going to have A2L and A3 refrigerants, and we need to be able to work with them comfortably, understand what our tools are. Hey, yeah, that's one of your shirts, actually. Came from the Johnstone conference a few months ago. Wish I'd have gotten some more of them. These are kind of cool. All right, moving forward. So there's one other one in there that is kind of interesting that I have seen some equipment used. Ray, it's an outstanding book. It's a great e-learning course. Highly recommend utilizing that in your classrooms and for your technicians. Also in that 335 they go forward to 2-89, there's also some additional things that are particular requirements for commercial refrigerating appliances that incorporate remote refrigerant condensing units.
This also covers your reach-in coolers, reach-in freezers, those sorts of things as well. It's another pretty big standard.
It really is. And that's the reason I wanted to point this out, is because a lot of our R290 things are going to be utilizing things like UL. So if you start working on a piece of equipment and you see that it's got the red indicators, red markings on the process stubs, and you find out that it's got like an R290 or 600 in it, you're probably going to find 6335-2. Yeah, exactly, right there. You're going to start seeing these UL requirements on the equipment. And so we want you to understand, you guys I feel like I'm behind times. I'm nothing. That's horrible. I'll have to get some, keep it in here. So just showing you why we use these UL standards. It's not just for the equipment in residential, it's equipment for refrigeration, it's in parts, it's in processes as well. So we use these standards to make equipment, to make parts, and to make sure that the process is right. Now, there are some additional things. One that I found in UL, there's a thing called Data Acceptance Program where you can use third-party verification to submit to UL. You can also, as a manufacturer, if you meet all of these qualifications, your lab and your testing procedures allow you to expedite some of the testing so that you can use industry-accepted processes and procedures to be able to actually submit your information. Oh, my camera's freaking out again. I'm going to hurry up and grab that. I don't know if you guys want to talk on that.
Yeah, so again, everything that we've pointed out up to now are different standards and things that tools can be tested to or rated for or compatible with. But what is the, as you mentioned, what is the requirement that all of these tools be tested? Do we have standards for, say, gauges and hoses? And right now it's the electrical things that we're seeing, the vacuum pump and the recovery machine, right?
Right.
I know some of you have seen, again, not by requirement, but by design, that vacuum pump manufacturers are actually putting a 10-foot cord on some of these new vacuum pumps to move the possible arc outside of your work area, things like that. So minor changes. If you looked at a recovery machine that was rated for A2L or certified A2L and one that wasn't, they wouldn't look much different from one another. Maybe, you know, cleaner or something like that. But again, they operating wise, they would look identical.
And we're actually going to do some of that. So we've got a few different pieces of our existing tools that we want to look at and see if they would qualify for A2L compatibility. One of the reasons Jason brings it up about like fittings and hoses is you got to think, we're not the only ones going through these transitions. We are just one industry that is a part of the HFC phase down. You have the automotive industry. You got to think, the automotive industry was required to transition to a low GWP refrigerant of less than 150 by model year 25. So they were well ahead of us in transitioning over to A2L refrigerants. And so you have SAE. SAE is the body that creates a lot of the standards for the automotive industry. They actually have specifications for their service hoses, fittings, couplers. So they have actually created standards for all of those things that we do not have yet.
On the stationary side, right?
Station, and you'll hear that term stationary. So you'll hear automotive standards and you'll hear stationary. And so we really fall into that stationary side of things. Now, will we have any more specific standards going forward? We don't know. As of yet, there is not. But I can tell you the automotive is very, very serious about hoses and fittings and couplers. So when we start talking about things like hoses and fittings and couplers in our own industry, we are going to take a look at some things that have been registered for or recognized as A2L compatible. Does not mean that they are A2L compliant or that they've been tested by any standard. It just means that they have been built to not create a spark or an ignition source. Okay.
Under normal circumstances or even catastrophic in the, like you mentioned, the event of a leak.
Exactly. Did you have something, Ty? I seen you getting excited.
Yeah, you mentioned the stationary side, and so I had.
He's got a stationary there. That's today's dad's joke.
That was no. Oh, that's true. That would have been today's dad joke. Let's do some real quick before we get out of here. I think this is a great time for myth busting. Anybody ready for myth busting? All right, hold on just one moment. And go.
All right, so I've been doing quite a bit of training, students, teachers, technicians, a whole bunch. And one of the common myths that's out there that gets presented to me is, heard you can't braise with these flammable refrigerants.
That's such a good point.
And my question to them is, well, how much brazing do you do with the refrigerant in the line?
I try never to.
All right, because when we're brazing a system, we're purging nitrogen, and the system is empty. So I don't see the problem there. So when I say the word flammable refrigerant, you think, well, I can't use the torch. But when you're pulling the torch out, the system is empty, and we should be purging nitrogen. So we're okay to go there. Yes, you can braze these systems.
Exactly. I was actually thinking about that after you mentioned that, and I started thinking, okay, what if? Oh, I took it off. I have my little mini torch set over here. Could I have a mini torch that is certified by a UL standard for an explosive environment? And theoretically, I could, as long as it wasn't turned on and used, right? My assembly.
Just sit there, right? Yeah.
Just sit there and not do anything. It could. Could it be used for service in the environment? Absolutely not. right? So that's what we use our standards for, is for design and construction in our normal operating.
So just to throw this out there, the temperatures, the pressures, the oils, the things that we're going to see in 32 and 454B systems moving forward are almost identical, within 3% of the 410A that we're using right now. So the ratings for hoses as far as pressures, and the oils and the gauges as far as pressures, and same as right, it's almost the same thing as we have right now. Within 3% is my roundabout.
Absolutely.
So from that aspect, there's no difference.
No. They did do two very different things in the automotive side that we haven't adopted in the stationary side. In the automotive, they actually have separate standards for the recovery equipment. So you got one for the manufacturing of all your standard equipment that you're going to be removing refrigerant from. The one that
anything that can access the refrigerant circuit, the hoses, the couplers, all of those things, yes.
And now, if we have a contaminated system, they actually have a separate one for it. So not only are they setting standards for new installations in standard recovery on known contaminated systems, we actually have completely separate standards and equipment designed for that. So we really don't have it that rough. We just need to be able to understand what we do have. All right, so if we have a piece of equipment, what are our manufacturers doing? They're doing one of two things. They're going to submit that piece of equipment for further testing, or they're going to design it around the standards that are used for that testing. And so that will be the difference between some of our listed and some of our certified products within the industry. Some manufacturers are constructing them to meet standards. Some manufacturers are sending those pieces of equipment off to actually get tested. And so what we see most of the equipment getting tested for still comes back to that AHRI 740, right? So when we look at things like UL Lab, now this is just one manufacturer, wasn't any specific one. I just happened to hop on there and do a little research looking for manufacturers that were utilizing UL standards. And I found this particular one, and that was on the 740. I actually found a few different manufacturers that are following the 740 for their standards. So when you see that AHRI 740-98, that is for commercial refrigeration recovery, recycling equipment certified for performance characteristics in accordance with the United States Clean Air Act, right? Things that were established for our fundamental equipment, not specifically for A2L environments, but there are some that do. We also have third-party companies like Met Labs that are doing certifications for pieces of equipment. This particular one is a combustible gas leak detector from Inficon. I just happened to get on Met Labs and do some research and found that it had some very specific UL 913 design characteristics. So we don't have one standard. Depending on what that tool is manufactured for, a tool manufacturer can almost self-certify. That simply is just stating that they're constructing it to a standard, but it hasn't been tested by that facility, or maybe it actually has. So this particular one was certified through Met Labs. So when you start seeing these certification numbers, it's worth your time to look it up and see what those certifications are actually for. It'll help for your safety.
So I can't find a UL rating on my old leak detector, my halide torch. It doesn't have a UL in it, so I'm probably not going to use this one for the new refrigerants.
Maybe not. But are there some that we can? That's the question that I want us to dive into, because I keep getting this. Do we have to buy all new tools? Well, not always. We need to make sure that we're using tools that are designed specifically for the application. Some have been relabeled for compatible. Some have had changes to be compatible. Some have not had changes. Also want to point out that Intertech is another third-party company that you're going to start seeing like UL. Remember with UL, we had the one where we're talking about the actual assembled components, assembled pieces, right? Well, we're going to start seeing that utilized in some of our equipment. This particular one is a new A2L evaporator coil, a universal evaporator
flex coil, right?
Flex coil from ADP. It can be used with that's right. It can be used on existing R410A systems without the A2L mitigation controls, or it can be used on an R32 or 454B system with the mitigation controls. And it has been independently tested by Intertech. So not UL, not Med Labs, Intertech. And so you will probably start seeing some of these additional labels. That one right there next to the AHRI certified is the Intertech. So it's using AHRI standards for the design, and it's using Intertech to validate it. Pretty common. We'll see a lot more of that kind of stuff going forward. All right, so let's talk about what ones are being relabeled, branded A2L compatible. Remember, it's not a certification. It is a standard that has been established by the manufacturer to validate that it is safe to use in the environment. Some have been tested, certified, some have not. So we're really relying on our brands to validate that they've been manufactured with these design parameters. And we see a lot of that. So you're going to see a lot of literature, and most of it's already out here already, showing the different pieces of equipment and tools that a manufacturer will recommend as being A2L compatible. Now, what if you already have some of these tools? Are they still A2L compatible?
That's a good question.
'Tis the question. So it comes down to the safe handling. And I would like for us to think about this for a minute.
Best practices.
Best practices always. And what is the design of A2L compatible? It is to not be able to introduce a spark or ignition into the atmosphere.
Right. What we're trying to accomplish here is to not have the tool be a cause for let's just call it an ignition event. That sounds more professional. We'll call it an ignition event. So we want to make sure that whatever this tool is not the cause of an ignition event.
Right. So let's think about some of these tools. Let's actually take a look at them for a little bit. And I want you all to think about this with me. Let's pick on this particular one since we're right here on screen. All right. I have my trustworthy MR45 from 2018. Is it A2L compatible?
I give up.
I know. I was looking for my timer. I really, really need my little Jeopardy timer. Or, how about some input? So everyone, there's still a lot of people out here. I would like your input on this as we continue this discussion. Is my MR45 that is 6 years old still A2L compatible?
I'll give you another one, Clifton. In my garage, I have my G5 Twin from 2017. Is it A2L compatible?
Let's look at a variety of things, and we're actually going to explain it. So when we come back, I want to leave that as an open question. We'll come back to that one, and I want to discuss a few other tools. I'll probably come back to this screen. I want to show you a couple others that I grabbed from different manufacturers of A2L compatible tools that is currently on the market, registered as A2L or labeled as A2L compatible. And also want to make sure if you are questioning your own tools, a really good resource is the True Tech Tools A2L tool list. They've been very diligent about providing a list of different ones. Well, Ray, what does the manufacturer label say? All it actually will say is A2L compatible. Some of them don't even have it on the equipment. It's on the marketing material, like the box and on the flyers. So let's talk real quick about manifold gauges, because that is one that gets brought up all the time. Do I have to buy new gauges? Go, Ty.
Right before we do that, can I back up to Norm? He had a comment here about using I think that's important when any refrigerant work. Anytime you're brazing, we should have a fire extinguisher ready. If you're in an attic and someone catches fire, you need a path out. Even though you may not be able to put it all out, you need to be able to make a path to get out. And one of the things that I keep is one of these newer Elements fire extinguishers. They work a little different. You got to know how to use them beforehand, but it's easy enough to put right in your torch set or in your tool bag. And if a fire breaks out, whether it's electrical or brazing or whatever, it's quick and it's easy to have with you. It's a nice little safety device. So it was a great point, making sure you have a fire extinguisher while brazing, and anyone you have is good. I'm not sponsored by anybody. It's just I found these out. They're easy to have and they don't expire like the other ones do. So I thought it was pretty cool.
I also want to mention that you're brazing, so you drove to the job site and you had these gases in your service vehicle, there's a DOT requirement that you have a Class B fire extinguisher already in your van if you're driving around with those gases.
That's exactly right. I think
I
we're
used
going
to
to
be
have to do one. Oh, go ahead.
I used to be scared, but 30 something years in the industry, I'm brazen now.
Oh, you're brazen through. I think we're going to have to do a separate show on the safety requirements for different installation atmospheres. I've been asked this before. What is the 10-foot rule? What is the 5-foot rule? What is the 3-foot rule? Depending on what tool you're using. I think we actually need to dive deep into those, especially now that we have some new specifications for installations with A2L equipment. I think I'll grab some OEM installation manuals and dive a little closer at that. All right. So, Ty, what kind of gauges do you like to use?
I love probes. Hoseless, I don't have to worry about contamination, cross-contamination, the least amount of refrigerant loss. And even on a traditional manifold set that's digital, just taking the gauges on and off, you have contamination or potential for contamination. So I like the probes. Go wireless, go hoseless.
I do too. And that's what I teach in all of my classes. And so when we look at manifold gauges, you've got the field piece job link set. I have my trusty Testos that I have had these are probably 10 years old. So 549 so it's a 549 eyes as well as what is that? 115 eyes. Okay. 10-year-old tools. Will they work with A2L refrigerants? And what does the manufacturer say? Some manufacturers have not been super specific on the A2L compatible. They've not hopped on the A2L compatible train. What they simply do is they show you when you're looking specifically at those pieces of equipment. So you can go to Testo and you'll find that those 549s are. And the easier way, and I'm going to recommend this to every educator, every student, every technician. If you have not updated the app for your digital gauges or your wireless probes, you need to do that ASAP. Because many of our tool manufacturers, if those tools are capable and designed to work with A2L refrigerants, the A2L refrigerants will actually be in the updates.
They'll appear in your menu, right?
Exactly. So we're actually going to look at that. So my 549s, the Testo screen isn't the brightest, but we're actually going to take a look at this. And I just did my update. And when I open my update for my specific tools, I actually already have my R32 A2L settings established for my gauges. So a lot of our tool manufacturers, if it is designed properly, they're not recertifying. They're simply stating that they were already designed that way from the get-go. So what makes that difference? Well, let's talk about that real quick. If I am a meter manufacturer, let's grab a meter, Ty. Right? So let's think about it. What would make that tool non-incendiary? How about if my electronics were in a sealed compartment? And that is exactly what we've done. If our tool was designed in a sealed compartment, the manufacturers look at it and go, there's no way for this thing to create an ignition. And we'll test it internally and we'll verify that. Now, what about my DL40 from about 1991 or 2? Well, you can notice immediately on my battery compartment, this meter was not designed with a sealed battery compartment, right? There's no way a tool manufacturer could look at a tool that has an exposed battery compartment and allow that to be utilized for A2L refrigerants. But what if a tool manufacturer takes an existing meter that didn't have an A2L compatible sticker on it the year before and they went, oh, by the way, when we redesigned this a couple of years ago, we already went with a sealed electrical compartment that is water resistant and is non-incendiary. Do I need to send this meter off for a $30,000 certification? Probably not going to happen. So when they're evaluated to standards, the tool manufacturers are able to call them A2L compatible based on national standards, not to a specific certification. Phil, I'm glad you joined us today. I can't wait to get you again on the show. Looking forward to having you back. So we really need to look at our tools and ask our manufacturers. The very first thing to do is take an inventory. That's what I was doing when I first got here. I was grabbing all my tools, running through, doing an evaluation, checking with my manufacturer. So Ty, what gauges are you utilizing there?
Oh, this is one of the new Navac digital gauges. I haven't used them yet. It just came in the box a few days ago. I'm a big probe fan myself, but wanted me to try them out and test them. So that's what I'm going to do. And so I was just looking to see, and it says on the back, let's see what it says. Give me a minute. I don't read as fast as you guys do.
Okay. I can keep my readers here. I can't read it. Comes with age.
So while Ty is reading that, I did ask a question earlier about my G5 twin out there.
Yep.
And the answer to the question is, listen, mine's from a while ago. Is it rated? Well, I went to the manufacturer's website, and holy cow, there's a tab right there where I can download a sheet of paper that says, listen, we've done internal testing, we've pushed this thing to the limits, and as long as you are employing industry best practices, this recovery machine will work just fine with A2L refrigerants. Yep. Right on their website.
And I think that's an important part for us to just know that we really need to check with the manufacturers of our equipment. So while Ty's looking at his, I'm gonna come back to my MR45. My MR45 has had one update since this was manufactured. One of the requirements that we get out of 740 is that the A2Ls are not drawn into a vacuum during refrigerant recovery. So the MR45, the updated MR45, actually has a shutoff at 0. So at 0, it will shut down the process. If I use my existing MR45 that does not have that function, but I personally manually shut the unit off at 0 and follow best practices, am I A2L compatible? And so by my recollection, by my reading my standards, as long as I'm following the best practices and my equipment was designed with non-incendiary components, so I'm using a DC motor, I'm using sealed electrical components, I have a factory plug that is non-removable, and as long as my electrical connection is in a area that is completely isolated so that there's no trip hazard, I'm using a safety cord for connection of it, then by design, my MR45 would still be compatible. And so with the manifold gauges, I wondered the same question. Would my iManifold from 2018 or 2019, is it A2L compatible? And it's another one of those tools. If you look for the manifold does not tell you that it is A2L compatible. But when I update my software, I find that all of the A2L refrigerants have been added to my software, telling me that my tool is an A2L compatible tool. It just has never been retested and recertified for it. It just had the updated software.
Again, there's no additional requirements on pressure, temperature, oil, those sorts of things, because that's all very, very similar to what we're already using today.
Exactly.
Do I have to get a new phone to be A2L compatible since it uses gauges here?
That's a good one. No, you just have to use best industry standards to make sure that there is no potential for ignition in the environment. Right?
I think Ray had a great question here.
Absolutely.
And with our A2L, it doesn't have to be non-explosive. Some of the things, they can have an open switch, but maybe they have to move more air through it. So there's some different standards there. One of the words that's being used a lot is intrinsically sealed. Intrinsically
safe, yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that it's an explosion-proof switch. It just means it has some extra layer of protection on it, which could simply mean a cover over the contact.
A cover, yes, or a rubber boot over the capacitor.
If you were to put that into a propane-rich environment, you would still have an ignition source. It's not stopping that. It's not a explosion-proof switch. It's just simply one extra layer of protection there.
The protection. Well, think about a vacuum pump that uses a PSC motor. Okay. So if we think about traditionally, we used a mechanical switch for that PSC motor, it would not be considered A2L compatible. What if I took that mechanical switch and I used a concealed solid state control for that? Could I use a PSC motor? The answer is actually yes. So one of the Navax pumps, they have an entry line A2L compatible pump, and that's exactly the process that they relooked at it. I've also seen with JB doing the exact same thing. Still utilizing the same PSC motor, just changing the controls to make sure that the controls cannot provide any type of ignition in that environment. So it really is all about verifying what your tools are, checking with the manufacturer, verifying the installation area that you have, and just take an inventory of the things that you already are using.
And there's one manufacturer that says they want you to replace the fan blade. I can't remember which one it was, but they wanted the fan to be replaced. And if you replaced the fan, it moved more air across it, which considered it to be A2L compatible.
That's exactly it. And so it's all about design verification. You know, is my 2018 unit still usable? If I take all the precautions and I make sure that it is in the correct environment, have the manufacturers made changes to this to even be better? That's not the right word. To be safer, to be more adequate for the area that you're working with? Yes, they have. So the updated MR45's got a longer cord, and it also has the zero shutoff on it, already enabled as an automatic feature. So some pieces of equipment will be updated and modified. Some of them will not. We do not have any specific certifications for hoses, fittings, and connections. Even if they're labeled for A2L compatible, it simply means that the manufacturers took into all of the specifications and requirements and designed them based on that. They may or may not have been tested, but they were constructed to be A2L compatible by one of the standards.
And it does bring up some good points. My old drill, I won't say the name of it. When I use it, I literally have sparks. You can see sparks flying inside of there. So it makes you wonder, you know, are we going to need drills that have some kind of an extra layer of protection if we're working in a rich environment? And really, it comes down to making sure that you're safe, making sure you have the proper ventilation, which we should have anyways. Let's think about if we were in an area that had a lot of refrigerant, an A1 refrigerant that's not flammable according to the testing. Like, it's still flammable, but let's say I had R22 in the area around me. And even though it has a low flammability of a flame, you're breathing that in and you could become unconscious pretty easily. So even if we're thinking about these steps of, hey, let's make sure we have proper ventilation. You know, you see mechanical rooms commercial, they got sensors and alarms, and they get mitigation where if you got a refrigerant leak, it brings on a fan and gets that out of there because there's a high quantity.
Fresh air, right?
Yes. So if we think about those same things, hey, if we're doing a recovery and we got a line that comes loose and we're filling that air with refrigerant, let's think about, you know, vacating that, ventilating that area, making sure. And that's why the training and certification is so important, so that we make sure that we're prepared, and that certification gives you more assurance for the customer. They know that, hey, this person's a professional. They've taken the extra steps, they've taken the extra training to make sure they're prepared.
Exactly. It's a good point that Jason brought up earlier. Kind of goes along with your drill, Ty. Do I need an intrinsically safe drill when working on A2L refrigerants? And it comes down to, as long as there is no A2L refrigerant in the atmosphere, there's no such thing as an A2L compatible tool, right?
Right.
If it's being used in that scenario. So it all comes back to proper procedures and safe handling.
So in summary, there is no necessary statement someone that says your tools must do this. All right. And on the stationary side, we've seen it on the automotive side. We've seen some things in Europe, Australia, those sorts of things. But as of now, on the stationary side, there's nothing that says, hey,
I just want to make sure that we remain calm. This is only a drill.
But manufacturers are doing their due diligence. Some equipment manufacturers are saying, hey, listen, if you're going to connect tools to our equipment, please make sure it's rated for A2Ls. Industry organizations are saying, listen, if you're going to, when we transition to these refrigerants, please make sure your tools are compatible, if you will, with A2Ls. So we're seeing a lot of the leaders around the industry, the equipment manufacturers, the industry organizations saying, listen, even though there's nothing that it's written in stone that says your tool must say this, we're seeing them all say it's best practice to, again, use a tool that's rated for that refrigerant or compatible with that refrigerant in that atmosphere.
Yeah, that's so true. Rary, that's exactly what we're here to do. There's a lot of people that don't understand exactly what this is, and we just want to help clarify it. And what you got, Ty?
What's going on there?
Well, Jason said to see if your tool says this, and my tool didn't say anything. So I guess it's not compatible. I don't know. I have to go check.
Might be sick. Lost his voice.
I could have done that one for our dad joke of the day. That's a good one. So it's all about just making sure that you are A2L ready and that you understand. Go ahead.
If you have questions, is the tool that I have, is it compatible with A2Ls? I will tell you that most of the manufacturers on their websites have updated their websites to say, if you're using model XYZ42, it's good to go. A lot of the manufacturers have been doing this on tools that have been out for the last 5 to 10 years, saying, no, this one's no good. Or this one, you got to change the blue fan blade to the orange fan blade and you're good to go. Or on this one, it's not good to go. Or what? So most of the manufacturers, again, on their websites are updated. If you have any questions, always go to their website and look it up. A lot of them are putting it on there for you. It's a good resource, a very good resource.
And if that cord is chewed up and the ground's been cut off, then that's an issue anyways.
Time to go. Yeah, and it brings up a good point. Remember, the two tools recognized by multiple industry certification bodies are recommending your recovery unit and your vacuum pump.
The electrical ones, right?
Electrical side. So that comes from EPA. That comes from AHRI, that comes from UL, and all of the additional subsidiaries using the same IEs.
Yeah, the NFPA, the NEC, right?
All right. Great stuff, guys. Anything to wrap up with?
Always employ industry best practices. Again, we can't stress that enough, especially as we make this switch over to these newer refrigerants. These systems are on the market in a lot of states. Mm-hmm. If you have questions, again, please, there's a lot of good resources out there. Go to the manufacturer's website. TrueTech has that A2L tab on there that you can go through and say, hey, is this one? Yes, is on the list. There are a number of resources out there that can be utilized for this. Don't just say, yeah, I'm going to do this. Make an educated decision.
And while we're talking about myth busting stuff, let's one of the things I see on social media a lot is people complaining about they watched a video from another country and this refrigeration unit exploded, this window unit exploded, and there was a big fireball. That's not an A2L situation. It's also unsafe practices. If you notice, they're walking around in sandals, which is not OSHA. They're carrying units on ladders on their backs. They're not following safe practices to begin with. And you got to think, even with propane right here, this will not have a flame unless I actually have oxygen with it. So even in a system, even if I had propane in a system, I cannot have a flame unless there's oxygen. So in an A2L system, this is highly flammable. This A2L is mildly flammable, big difference. But even at that inside refrigeration system, there should not be oxygen. If we pull the proper vacuum, we pull that proper vacuum down, dehydrate the system, get all the moisture, everything out of there, there should be no way for this to have a flame, even if it was highly flammable. So if you're not doing those safety practices, you have some of those methods that were bad long ago, like just purging. Those are situations, and also in other countries, they're known to use propane and even methane in refrigeration systems. So when you see those videos and people are sensationalizing those, that's a whole different complex. And actually, if you look now, most of the new refrigerators sold, they're actually isobutane, R600A in there, which is an A3 highly flammable refrigerant. And they're in refrigerators all over the country. And there may be a story here and there about something happening, and we never know like the whole, like what actually caused it, the whole story. But they're in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of refrigerators around the world. And it comes down to those safe practices. So yeah, you can see a story like that and it gets people's attention, and it, it just blows up or goes crazy with all the attention on it. Let's think about the reality of it. If you follow those proper safety practices, it's not going to be an issue, but you have to do it. It's about you. You can buy the best tools there are. You can spend the most money on the coolest stuff, but it comes down to you. You have to be the one that's the professional and following those safe practices, and who you're working with. If you see somebody else following unsafe practices, say, whoa, let's stop this situation. It's like if you had training with cranes. Anybody sees anything unsafe, they say, stop, stop, stop. And they shut everything down, evaluate what's going on, and you move forward. And really, that should not apply to just A2Ls. That should really apply with anything. People are cutting refrigerant lines. That's a hazardous environment you've created, because now even the refrigerant oil in the air creates a possible flammable situation. So the old ways, a lot of bad habits are there. We just need to get rid of those bad habits as we move forward and do it the safest way possible, and stop spreading the fear, but definitely get educated.
You're myth busting when you said, when you see that video and that unit explodes. I will tell you that A2Ls lack the ability to actually explode. They don't have the flammable character. They don't burn fast enough. They don't have a high enough burning velocity. They don't generate enough heat of combustion. The ignition energy required is not internal to that unit. So physically, those can't be A2Ls. They have to be mixed with something else.
Norm, I was just sitting here thinking that myself. That's my good buddy Jerry West that was on here, Jerry Lee, a while ago, and not from this industry, and learning a lot as a consumer and as a learner. And I think that we are going to have to start doing some more consumer-focused education. So
yeah, they're going to see you carrying a unit in that has a flame symbol on it and says caution on it, and they're going to want to, hey, what are you bringing into my house? You got to be prepared to have that conversation with the customer.
Norm, I will schedule this one out. I promise.
We should be having this symbol right here on the side of all the vehicles, all cars, because they have a flammable factor. Even electric vehicles, that's a flammable factor. Every vehicle should be having these stickers plastered all over the car. Let's put it into perspective.
Indeed, absolutely. Well, guys, I appreciate you so much. For those that want to continue learning about the low GWP transition that we are having in not just our industry, but many industries, stay tuned, hop in here with us, check out our A2L Fact Check blog, and to get better educated and certified, hit that QR and go check out our low GWP training course. And we'll see you all again, not next week, 4th of July. I'm going to take some time off and go enjoy a little bit. The following week, we'll see you all. We're booked out way into August, so sometime in August, we will do our low GWP consumer education course, I promise. All right, everyone, have a good evening.